Okay, now I'll do my official welcome. Hello, everybody that is attending tonight. Tonight, Excel, formulas and functions. Kind of an Excel refresher, possibly for some of you. Possibly, hopefully, you'll also learn a few new things that you never knew before. I have found over many years of teaching this type of stuff that Excel kind of tends to be that product that we all got kind of dumped into, and we muddled our way through for a while and sort of figured out how to do things and we're adequate with it. But there may be a variety of things that you just never really learned to do the right way. Years ago, when I first got into training, I would have some people, back when I would teach a full Excel introduction class for a full day, I'd have people that would claim they knew Excel really well, and they want to skip right to the intermediate or advanced class. And after chatting with them a little bit, it was usually pretty obvious that they were thinking more highly of their skills than they really actually had when it came to the product. And I said, come to the intro class, and I guarantee you, you'll learn something. And most of the times that was the case. So let's hope that's the case tonight with you all attending tonight's session. I've got a pretty ambitious agenda of things that I would like to cover. I've made almost 50 slides here. This is kind of the largest presentation I've made for one of these training sessions. But I wanted you all to have these notes and stuff for later. So again, you can download this presentation. You've got the slides there. If you access the OneDrive, you can download all these slides and take away a lot of the tidbits that we're talking about. So I've got, as you can see here, a rather ambitious, these are just the main topics, but we've got a rather ambitious agenda for tonight of things that I'd like to get through and hopefully kind of re-educate you or just educate you in general when it does come to Excel. So the first thing I want to clarify, I've called this class Excel Formulas and Functions. It's going to be a lot more than that. There's a lot of things that we're going to go into just about the basics of using Excel. But there's something I need to clear up, and this has been a pet peeve of mine for as long as I've been in the training business. And that is people using the words formula and function interchangeably, or they just kind of blurt it out and they don't really know what they're talking about. And I'm a stickler for accuracy when it comes to these things. And especially in software, I like people and want people to know the correct terms for use things and to understand what that correct term is. And here, the key point I want to make is that the terms formula and function are not interchangeable terms. They have very specific definitions in Excel. Basically, a function is a mathematical operation, and they're always used in a formula, okay? Conversely, you may have a formula which does some sort of math, and it may not have any sort of function in it. Okay, and again, when we get to the formula writing later, this is going to be more obvious what we're kind of getting at here. So the terms are not interchangeable. So, I just did this quick little graphic to kind of illustrate what we're talking about here, is that functions are always part of some sort of formula. But a formula itself in Excel does not necessarily have to have a function in it to do what it needs to do, okay? We'll go into this a lot more detail later, but this is a terminology thing that I think is important to keep straight as we go through the material here. All right. Now, before we really kind of get too much into working with formulas and functions and getting Excel started here while we're going through the slides, there's a few things about just kind of some basics of operating in Excel that we want to talk about, and that is understanding the difference between text and values in cells. What does the formula bar do for us when we're in Excel? How do we edit text and values that are already in cells? How do we just do basic things like selecting our cells as we're moving around? And then really importantly, and this is something that, again, I find causes confusion with a lot of people. Oh, excuse me. Grab a little water there. Deleting and clearing cells as we're working in Excel. So the first thing, let me jump over to my spreadsheet here. And I've just got a big blank spreadsheet here. By the way, as a note, I will be demonstrating things in Office 2016. That is the most current version of Office. But everything I show you tonight basically goes all the way on down to like many, many previous versions of Excel. This is the basics. This stuff has not changed in a long time. Okay, so if I go into Excel here and I just start to type some basic text, like just the names of some animals, okay, you'll notice that the text that's going in there in Excel is left aligned in the cells automatically, which is kind of what we would expect. And the other thing to note here is that very long text looks like this, okay? That really, I've typed just a long sentence there, and it kind of looks like it's taking up a bunch of cells, but the reality is that I was on cell A5 when I was typing that. So technically speaking, all of that text that I typed there is in cell A5. There is technically nothing in B5, C5, D5, E5, F5, and G5. Even though it kind of looks like there's something there, they're technically empty. And this will get to what we're talking about with the formula bar in a few minutes. Okay? Now, numbers, if I type them in a cell, let me get some numbers here. Okay? When I type numbers in a cell, they're always going to be right aligned. Okay? No, I haven't applied any alignment to the cells. Excel's doing this automatically. And you know what? This just goes back to what we learned with addition and subtraction and whatnot back in first grade, second grade. And your teacher said all your ones places line up, all your tens places line up, all your hundreds and so on and so forth line up. Now, of course, I could do something with a decimal here that's going to kind of throw things off a little bit. But the reality is numbers are going to be right aligned. Now, the other interesting thing with numbers, though, is that if I type a really long number, it will not overlap into other cells. Excel is going to do everything it can to try to make that number fit into that cell, which includes, if you look here in cell A15, it includes converting the number into something called scientific notation. Okay, that 1.23658 e to the 24, that's basically something called scientific notation. Okay, so a quick going over this slide, when we're putting in text and values into a spreadsheet, text is always going to default to left alignment. Now, we can change that. If you want text to be centered or right, you can change that. But the default, what Excel is always going to do when you type text, is it's always going to align it to the left to start. Secondly, text is allowed to appear to occupy other cells. That goes back to here. Yes, this sentence here, the other thing to note here, blah, 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 looks like it's on several cells. The reality is it's not, okay? Numbers or values always default to right alignment. And in the case of values, Excel will always try to confine that to the cell. So there's no overflow. You may have also sometimes seen something that looks like this, where you see all pound signs. Okay, that means the number is just too long to display. Let me make this even smaller. There we go. The number is just too big to display within the cell. So you see, some people like to call them railroad tracks. You see all pound signs, all number signs. So Excel tells you there's a number there, but it can't display it because there's not enough room. Because again, numbers aren't allowed to overlap into other cells. Okay, it's just one of the basic rules of Excel. Okay, so let's talk about the formula bar. That's this thing up here, right next to where it says FX. Okay, this is what's called the formula bar. The formula bar is where you could kind of write out formulas, but really the thing about the formula bar is that it's always going to tell you what is actually in a cell. Okay? When I click on cell B5 right here, going back to this example here where there was all this extra text, yeah, if I look at the spreadsheet, it looks like there's stuff in cell B5. It looks like it's occupied. But if I actually click on cell B5 and then look at the formula bar, you'll notice my formula bar is completely empty, which means cell B5 is empty. Okay? Now, on the flip side, and we'll see this later, sometimes you'll have cells that down here look like they're empty, but in reality, there's a formula hiding in that cell. Okay? So the big takeaway here is the formula bar is always going to tell you what is really in a cell. And just because a cell looks empty doesn't mean it's actually empty. I just mentioned that. A formula could be in that cell. On the converse side or the flip side, just because a cell looks like it has content doesn't mean it actually has content. Text can overflow and look like it's in a cell. Okay, again, coming back here, it looks like there's something in these cells, but the reality is, in B5 through G5, it looks like there's something here. The reality is there's nothing there. They're empty. Because when I look at the formula bar up top, it's completely empty. Okay? All right. Now, once I've got stuff in a cell, how do I edit it? How do I change it? You might be tempted to maybe press delete or start typing something else on a cell. If I come up to here where it says dog and type something else like person, the problem is that erases what was there. Well, I don't want to erase it. I just want to edit what was there. There's actually 3 ways that you can get into editing a cell. You can just double-click the cell to activate the cursor. You could click on the cell and then click in the formula bar and make changes. Or my favorite keyboard shortcut for this is F2 on the keyboard. In any of these cases, for instance, if I want to change this dog to doggy, I could double-click. Okay, that was one way to do it. I could simply come up here to the formula bar. Look, that cell is selected, but I could come up to the formula bar and change it to the word dog. Okay. Or if you're a keyboard shortcut person like myself, you could click on the cell, press F2, and that will also activate the cell. Dogs and dogs and dogs. Okay. So that's those are 3 ways that you can edit a cell when it already has content. The cell's empty, you can just go ahead and start typing. That's not going to hurt anything. But if there's already content in the cell, you can either double-click the cell, you can click in the formula bar, or you can press F2 on the keyboard. Any of those methods are going to work just fine. Now let's talk about selecting cells. Again, these are a lot of basics that I like to go over because we're gonna use this stuff later. So there's a method to my madness here. I'm not just going over this stuff to waste your time. I'm going over it because later on when we get into doing some certain things with formulas and with functions, you're gonna need to know how this all works. And hopefully you'll learn some shortcuts that you never knew before. When we wanna work with more than one cell, okay, there are a variety of ways that we can do that. You can use the mouse to select cells. You can use your keyboard to select cells. And then there are a few tricks that are a combination of both, using the mouse and using the keyboard to select cells. Either of those work. I've created these charts. I'm not going to go through every shortcut, but you can look at these later. But I'm going to go over a few of these right now. Let's talk about selecting cells with a mouse. Well, with the mouse, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to click and drag over everything that I want to select, and it's as simple as that. You don't have to, but you generally want to start in the top left and drag to the bottom right. But the reality is I can drag in any direction, and it doesn't really matter. Okay. Now, if I want to select an entire column or an entire row, simply click on that header. So if I want all of column C, I would come up here to where it has the letter C and just click, and that selects the entire column. If I want all of row 5, I'm going to put my mouse right on the number 5 and click, and that's going to highlight the entire row, or select, I should say. It's going to select the entire row. Okay? If you need multiple columns or multiple rows, you're going to drag over the letters. So if I want from column B all the way through column G, I'm going to put my mouse right on top of the B. I'm going to keep holding it down, and I'm just going to drag all the way over to H, or whatever letter you need to drag to. Now rows, be careful with rows because things are a little bit tighter here, so make sure you're right on top of the number. And if I want to select rows 3 through 10, I'm just going to drag over those. right? But be careful because grabbing in between the rows does something different. I'm not going to get into all that stuff with formatting tonight. That's another class. So just be careful when you're selecting. So those are some tricks for selecting with the mouse. If I want a group of cells, a single or multiple columns, a single or multiple rows. Now, I happen to be a keyboard fanatic, especially when it comes to Excel, because quite honestly, I worked with Lotus 123 many, many, many eons ago, and the only way to navigate back in those days was with a keyboard. Mice just really didn't exist. And because I really learned way back in the day to use a computer without a mouse, I use the keyboard for a lot of stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, a mouse is really darn convenient, and there's a lot of things you just can't do without a mouse. But the nice thing is a lot of those keyboard shortcuts are still in the products, and some of them are pretty darn convenient. And especially here in Excel, when it comes to selecting cells, I love some of these tricks. First off, in cell selection. You know, if you just want to select 2 cells, yeah, you can do that with the mouse and drag. But quite honestly, to me, that's too much work. If I just need to select these 3 cells that say cat, fish, and bird, to me, it's faster to hold down the Shift key and then just press the arrow key twice, and now those 3 cells are selected. Okay, and this works in any direction. If I want to select, you know, these 10 cells, there you go. And as long as I'm holding down Shift, okay, and hitting the arrow keys, I can make this block bigger or smaller. I can go up and down, and I can select any cells that I want. So I like this trick if I'm just doing a couple of cells. Now, if I was doing more, really, if I was doing 10 cells, I'm going to pick up the mouse and do it because it's quicker. But if I just need to select, look, I just need these 2 cells. To me, it's much faster to keep my hands on the keyboard and just do Shift down arrow. Now, there are some other interesting tricks that we can do with the Shift and other keys. You'll notice that all of these selection tricks, except the last one, involve the Shift key. So the little mnemonic here is that Shift is the selection helper. Okay, when you want to select stuff in Excel and you're using the keyboard, Shift plus something generally does something. And you can see on this chart, there's a lot of these things that'll happen. For instance, all content in a direction. Okay, if I go up here to A1 and I want to select all the way down through A5, if I go Shift Control down arrow, it's going to select those 5 cells. All right, now, the interesting trick here is that if I do that again from the same spot, is that it's going to go down to the next group of content. So I'm going to hold down Control Shift down arrow. Now I'm still holding Control and Shift. And I'm going to hit it again. And notice it jumps to that 12 because it's going to go to the next start of content. If I hit it again, I'm still holding Control and Shift down. Notice it goes all the way down to row 15. Now, there's nothing in the way from here on. So if I hit Control down arrow, it's going to go, and it has all the way down to row 1 million, whatever it is down there. And I've pretty much selected the entire column. Now that's kind of a little excessive, but that's the way it works. Okay. Let's see here. There are a bunch of other these similar tricks. I'm not going to go through each and every one of these. However, I do want to talk about the last one, and that's all cells on the worksheet. If you need to select everything on a particular sheet, okay, like the entire sheet, okay, you can go Control A, and that selects the entire sheet. Yes, it does start with Control. It does not start with Shift. However, what I'll tell you is that Control A is a standard selection trick for almost all Microsoft products. And matter of fact, not even Microsoft products, it's kind of one of those standards across everything. So Control A is almost always select all. In Word, in PowerPoint, here in Excel, if you're in your web browser, and just about any other product, they all pretty much support the idea that Control A is to select all things. Okay. Now, there are a set of mixed tricks here, and that is it involves using the mouse and the keyboard. And generally, we use these tricks when we're trying to select multiple things. For instance, let's say I do want to select columns B through N. Now, I talked earlier that you could just drag across there, but there's another way. I'm going to highlight column B just by clicking it. I'm going to come over here to column N. I haven't clicked anything and I'm not dragging. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and then click, and notice that selects all those columns. I can do this with rows too. If I want rows 10 through 20, yes, I could click and drag over those 10 rows. That's possible. Or I could click row 10, move my mouse down to 20, hold down the Shift key and click, and voila, I've selected those 10 rows. This also works for groups of cells. Basically, you'll select the top left and then the bottom right. So if I start here at A1, okay, that's the first cell I'm going to click. And if I come down here to about N30 and shift click, notice that it selects that entire rectangle. So I could do D1 through D35 is by using the shift click trick. I could do A1 through M14, M15, okay? So again, that's pretty much the same as dragging, but sometimes it's a little more accurate. Just depends. The final trick here is that if you want to select things that aren't together, and this is something you almost always have to do with the keyboard and the mouse, okay? Because the mouse is always going to drag. Let's say I wanted columns B, E, and G for some reason. There's no way to do that only with the mouse, because as soon as I click on the other column, it unselects the first one. I can't drag from B to E because it's going to do all of them. So if I want B and E and H, what I'm going to do is hold down the Control key and click those other columns. And now I can select as many columns as I want as long as I'm holding down the Control key. So if I want A, D, E, H, and L, I can simply hold down the Shift key and select those columns. If I want rows 2, 6, 12, 19, and 27, again, all I'm doing is holding down the Control key as I click those headings. The other thing I can do is just individual cells. If I want this cell, this cell, this cell, this cell, I can just sit here and hold Control all day. This looks like Super Breakout from back in the day, right? Okay, I can just sit here and just keep highlighting cells. As long as I continue to hold down Control, I'm selecting those cells, and then I can do something to all of those cells at once. Okay? All right. Last thing in this unit before we finally move on to the stuff with formulas is erasing cells. Let me do this. I'm going to type my name right here, but I'm also going to add some formatting to it. Let's make it red. Let's make it 24 points, and let's make it bold. Okay? Now, we have a habit in most products that when we want to erase something, we press the delete key or the backspace key. And you know what? That works okay. You know, backspace will erase this cell. Okay, delete will also do the same thing in that cell. But there's an interesting quirk here in Excel, and that is that although I did delete the content, that cell technically is not empty right now, because if I type something else, for instance, maybe Jason's name, notice it came out with the same formatting as before. And I'm like, wait, no. I just want it to type, I just want it to look like it did before. But no matter what I type, hello world, everything I keep typing is going to look like that. Even if I press delete, if I come back here and press delete like 4 or 5 times, it still has the same formatting. What's going on here? Well, when you want to erase or delete what's in a cell, you have to take into consideration how Excel classifies or treats the information that's stored in a cell. And that is that a cell stores separately 2 main things. One of those is the content of the cell, and then the other one is the formatting of that cell. Okay? Now, content is anything, the content of this cell is basically what you wrote in it, okay? So that's any text, any values and numbers, any formulas, anything that you basically write or type into a cell is something we call content. That's the cell's content. So again, in layman's terms, it's what you wrote, okay? Now, the other thing that a cell stores is the formatting information. What's it going to look like? The font color, the font size. There's a million things. I just picked the popular ones here. But there's a variety of things about how does the cell look. Okay, so we've got the content and we got the formatting that are stored in cells. Now here's the big kicker. Oops, let me get back over here to PowerPoint. There we go. Here is where the heavens open for you, and this is the thing. When you press delete on the keyboard in Excel, the only thing Excel is going to erase is the content, not the formatting. Okay? So coming back over here to this cell, and I see Raylene has joined, so she's going to be my victim now. Even though cell G8 looks completely empty, and I've pressed delete 3 or 4 times here, the thing is that every time I type something, it still has the same format. What's going on here? Okay? Well, the thing is the delete key is only erasing the content. All that formatting information, the font color, the font size, all that stuff that I did is still a part of that cell. How do I get rid of it? How do I really reset a cell back to normal? And that's where we need the clear command. And you'll find the clear command up here on the home tab. Over in the editing group, it looks just like an eraser. And when I click that, I'm not going to go into all the possibilities that you have here, but I want you to notice the first 3 options: clear all, clear formats, and clear contents. It's possible to clear the content without clearing the formatting. It's possible to clear the formatting without clearing the content. Or if I really need to empty out a cell, I'm going to select clear all. So let's look at this again. Let me type my name there. Now let's say, okay, I still want my name there. I just don't want all the formatting. How can I fix that? Well, I can go up to clear and say, you know what, clear the formats. And look, the content stayed the same. The formatting disappeared. Okay, let me go back. Let's do the opposite. Let's just say clear contents. Well, that's the same as pressing the delete key, because now no matter what I type, there's the situation that we had before. If I select the first option, clear all, that erases all the formatting, that erases all the content, and now we're back to normal. Okay? So that's an important command to understand, because people, and this is, again, there may be hidden minefields in your Excel spreadsheet, maybe from a previous user, where there was formatting on a cell and you type something and all of a sudden it comes out looking a certain way. And you're like, what the heck happened here? You run into this a lot when it comes to numbers, and I could spend a good 15 minutes on this, but I can't afford it right now. But let me just tell you in a nutshell. If you type some sort of number into a cell and it does something funky, it's usually a formatting issue, and that the wrong numeric format has been applied to the cell. And you just need to apply the correct format or erase all the formatting in general and start over. Okay? All right, so that gets us through that first stuff. Let's move on to another fun feature here, and then I think we'll get into our formulas, and that's AutoFill. And again, I want to spend some time on this one because we're going to use it with formulas here in a few minutes. And for this one, I'm going to open up another spreadsheet. There we go. AutoFill is an amazing feature of Excel. And if you happen to have Excel 2016, they've amped up the AutoFill into something called Flash Fill. But I'm not going to spend any time on that because I'm not sure what version everybody has. But I want to talk about AutoFill and what it does. Oops, slides. Where'd you go? There we go. Okay. AutoFill is a feature that allows us to quickly fill up cells with text, values, dates, formulas, and other special sequences. Depending on what you're trying to fill, AutoFill will work differently. Basically, AutoFill is we're going to drag the bottom corner of the cell. Now, again, depending on what's in the cell and what you've selected, this is why selection was important. Depending on what's in the cell and what you've selected, you'll get different results. So let's talk about text first. I've got a single word here in this cell. It's just the word kitten. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my mouse right on the bottom right corner. And you'll know you've done it right when your cursor changes to a thin plus sign. I'm going to take that word kitten, put my mouse right in the bottom right-hand corner, and just drag down. And you'll notice it's going to repeat the same word all the way down. So rather than having to write the word kitten 500 times or even copying and pasting, all I had to do was drag it down. Right? That's if I do a single word. Oops, let me redo that. Just leave it there. Now, what about a sequence of words? I've got the words dog, cat, fish, and bird. What I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight or select all 4 of those cells. Okay, again, you could use your mouse or you could use your keyboard based on the tricks that I showed you earlier. Now, again, I'm going to put my mouse right in the bottom right corner, and I'm going to drag down. Excel basically is just going to repeat that sequence over and over until I stop. So I've got dog, cat, fish, bird, dog, cat, fish, bird, over and over and over. It's just going to keep doing that until I decide to stop. Okay. So with text, if I autofill with a single cell, it's going to repeat the text. If I select multiple cells, Excel is going to repeat the sequence of text in the selected cells. Okay. Now let's take numbers. Numbers sort of behave like text and sort of don't. Notice here in this cell, I've got the number 1. If I drag that down, it's just going to repeat the number 1 all the way down. But if I have more than one number, Excel is going to analyze the sequence and try to guess or predict what I'm doing, which is different than what we had with text. With text, it's not going to go 2 4 2 4 2 4 2 4 2 4 here. It's going to go, hey, it looks like you're counting by 2s. And if I grab this and drag it down, you'll notice I now have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, so on and so forth. Okay. Let's look at the next column here. I've got the number 5 and then the number 10. Okay. Looks like I'm counting by 5s. So if I highlight those 2 cells and drag it down, well, gosh golly, yes, I was counting by 5s. If I wanted to count by 1s, I would go 1, 2, and drag on down. This works in any order. Look, I've got 100, and then I've got 99. So I'll highlight both of those cells, grab the autofill, drag down, works perfectly fine. Now, if you have something weird, if you have a weird sequence, like let me do this, 2, 4, I'm just going to do doubles because it's pretty obvious to me looking at this that this is a doubling sequence. Okay, Excel doesn't always figure it out. So here's a sequence where to me as a human, it's very obvious that each one of these values is double the previous, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but if I highlight that sequence and then drag it down, it doesn't work. I'm not even sure what Excel is trying to do here. I wouldn't even be able to make heads or tails of it. Okay, so if it doesn't always get it right, but 99% of the time it does, as long as you're not doing something weird. If I put in the Fibonacci sequence or a series of primes, that's not going to work. Excel's not going to figure that out. Okay? All right, so a single cell, it's going to repeat the number. Multiple cells, Excel is going to attempt to analyze the sequence and predict what's next. Now, let's talk about dates, because dates are a little weird. Dates technically are a type of numeric value, but they're treated differently when it comes to autofill. Let's take a look at this. In this cell here, I've got a single date. It's 1/1/2017. Now, based on what we saw previously, if I was to take one cell and drag it down, it would repeat the value. But Microsoft's pretty smart here, and they go, you know what? Generally, if you have a date and you want to fill, you want a sequence. Okay, so if I take this single date and drag it down, it literally just goes through the entire sequence automatically. It just automatically assumes that I want a sequence of dates. Now, I'll show you how you can override that in a few minutes. Okay, so as long as I drag down and I've got a single date, it's just going to start with that date and go. Now, if I do want a sequence of some sort, just like before, I need to give it the first two dates, and then it's going to try to figure it out. Once again, sometimes Excel gets it right and sometimes it doesn't. So for instance, here I've done the first day of 2 months. So if I highlight that and drag it down, yep, it got it pretty well. It even works for end of the month. So let me go 01/31 2017, 02/28 2017, which happens to be today. All right. Fortunately, Excel is pretty smart here, and it knows that I'm trying to do the last day. So you notice it gets the last day of every month there correctly. Other sequences, it's not as good at doing. Let's see here. Let me try. I don't remember if this one works or not. Let me do 01. Let's say I want the 1st and the 15th of every month. If I remember right, I don't think that works. Okay, let's do 02/01. I need to give it a few dates. Sometimes you got to give it a few so it can hopefully figure out the pattern. Okay, and I think, let's see here what's going to happen. Now, yeah, it's not smart enough sometimes to figure out that pattern. You're like, look, I gave you 4 dates. Just give me the 1st and the 15th of every month. All right, so it didn't pick up on it. That's what I thought was going to happen. It just starts repeating the sequence. Okay, so still pretty handy. Now, in any of these sequences that I've done, there's this little hint here. You can always override what's happening with a right drag. This is something you rarely do with your mouse. It's almost always the case when you drag with the mouse that you're dragging with the left mouse button. In Excel, however, a right drag actually does something. Let me go back to this example here with the single date. Let's say that I actually want to repeat 1/1/2017 all the way down. I'm going to put my mouse on the corner of the cell, the bottom right corner, but instead of left dragging, I'm going to right drag all the way down. Now, when I let go, I'm going to get a little pop-up, and I'm going to actually say copy cells. And now that gives me 1/1/2017 all the way down. Okay, so you can always override the default action with a right drag. Okay. You can also, this trick also works with text dates. And by this, I mean things like the days of the week and the months of the year. So for instance, here's Monday. All I gotta do is drag it down and it just automatically does the sequence. Okay. If I have here Monday, Wednesday, just like with other stuff, it's gonna go every 2 days. Okay. Now notice it didn't go Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday, because it assumed my sequence is that I'm going every 2 days. So it's got Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and so on and so forth. If, however, I really did want Monday, Wednesday, Monday, Wednesday all the way down, do the right drag trick I just talked about. Right drag down and say copy cells. And now I can override what just happened there. Okay. Months work the same way. If I drag January down, it's going to go through the month names. I took a little extra time here because we're going to use this trick when it comes to formulas and functions a little bit later. Okay. All right. So I'm going to skip over custom lists. You can look at that slide later because I'm getting a little behind here. So let's talk about formulas. Let's get to the meat and potatoes of what we're doing here. Formulas basically are how Excel does math. And when I want to create a formula in Excel, we always asterisk start with the equal sign. That is what indicates to Excel that I'm writing some sort of formula, that I want to perform some sort of math. What's interesting, though, is that the equal sign is the first thing that you type in the cell. You know, when we learned math all those years ago, you always put the equal sign at the end. In Excel, we start with the equal sign. Why? Well, it's easier for the product to find it, okay? Because some formulas can get really long. So if I was typing a really long formula and then put the equals at the end, it takes more for the product to find it. So they just put the equal sign at the beginning, and that just says, hey, you got a formula here. Now, there is one exception to the formulas always start with the equal sign, and that's something called an array formula. We're not even going to touch it. That's like advanced Excel. So let's not even worry about what array formulas are. Okay. So if I want to create a formula in my spreadsheet to add things up or subtract or whatever math I'm doing, we just do the standard mathematical operations that we've always learned from years and years ago. The only slight difference is we have to use some different characters. Multiplication, yeah, most of us back in the day, we learned multiplication with a lowercase x. The reality is that in computers, that doesn't work so well because they really can't tell the difference between a lowercase x and multiplication. So in a computer, we use the asterisk for multiplication. Division, it's a forward slash because we don't have that funky symbol that we learned. I don't even know what the technical name of that thing is. All right. So let me bring up another spreadsheet. Let's go to this one. I think this is the one I wanted. Yep, that's the one I wanted. And if I just want to add up some numbers, all I need to do is write a formula and use the right operators. So if I want to add up these 4/4 of numbers, I'd literally just come to cell G5 and I want to write a formula. So I'm going to start with the equals sign. And I want to add up C5, D5, E5, and F5. So I literally just go C5 plus D5 plus E5 plus F5. Now, some of you are going to go, Scott, why are you doing the long way? I'm doing the long way for a reason. Okay, we'll get to the functions later. There, that's all I needed to do. And that worked perfectly fine. I've got the result, 23,442. Okay, and that added up C5, D5, E5, and F5. Now, let's talk autofill. We just learned it, right? Well, I basically need that same formula down the next two cells. So all I got to do is grab the corner of the cell, drag down, boom, done. You don't need to write that formula over and over again, especially after writing all those this plus this plus this plus this. Easy enough, just drag it down. So this is why I spent some time on autofill, because you can use it here for your formulas. It's really convenient. Okay, we'll show you some other tricks with that later. But notice the formula here is really simple. It's the same math we learned back in 3rd grade or 2nd grade or whatever. Cell plus cell plus cell plus cell. If I wanted to subtract them, I could take C5 minus D5 minus E5 minus F5. That's not going to work very well here because of the numbers that I got, but still, it's the same math. Nothing's different. It's exactly what we learned way back when. Okay, oops. Let me close autofill. I don't need this spreadsheet anymore. We'll go ahead and save that. And yeah, all right, we're good. However, this same math that we learned for quite a while took a big change when we got into algebra. Okay, and we started to encounter things that had more math in the same sequence, right? For the longest time, it was always like, all right, if we're adding stuff up, it's just addition. And if we're subtracting stuff, it's just kind of all together. But then we hit algebra. And in algebra, we like, oh, well, now we've got subtraction and addition and division and multiplication all in the same little problem here. How do I solve this? And that's where something very important comes up called the order of operations. In that when I've got mathematics that involve more than one type of operation, I need to do them in a specific order. And that specific order is here on this slide. Parentheses, powers, multiply, divide, add, and subtract. Some of you may have learned it as parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract. And I think most of us probably learned this mnemonic for remembering it. And that is, please pardon my dear Aunt Sally. Or again, if you learned the E version, you got the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. This is the order that we must solve things in. If I had an extra half an hour, I would go through the Excel math tests that are uploaded for you. Take a look at those and apply these rules. And for each math test, I've pasted the link there to my OneDrive. Go ahead and download those. And I want you to look at those and practice that later. And practice using the, first off, do the test and then look at the answers. And you'll see on the answer sheets, I've actually shown you how people get the wrong answer and then how you get the right answer, okay? Because people, if they don't know their order of operations, you'll see that that's the right way. Why is this important in Excel? Because we're doing math. And if you don't know the order of operations and the right way to solve things, then you're going to get the wrong thing in your spreadsheet. okay? If I need Excel to add some stuff before it multiplies, then I've got to use parentheses because parentheses come first, okay? Because if I didn't use the parentheses, well, then Excel would multiply first and then do the addition. And maybe I needed to do the addition first and then the multiplication. And that's where we use parentheses because parentheses takes precedence over everything else. Just to further clarify the rules, so you got it. If you have multiple sets of parentheses in a problem, or if you have them inside of each other, you solve from the inside to the outside. Now, yes, the mnemonic goes multiply, divide, add, subtract, but the reality is that multiplication and division are the same thing. So if you've got multiplication and division in the same formula, basically just solve them left to right regardless of type. Addition and subtraction are the same thing. Think about it. A subtraction is literally just adding a negative number. Again, that's something we learned in algebra. And so since subtraction is just a form of addition, if you've got multiples in a formula, you just solve them left to right. Look at those math tests that I uploaded. I do not have time to go over those here. And that really that's a good practice for making sure you understand order of operations when you're writing your formulas. We're not going to get this detailed with the formulas that we write tonight, but in what you start to do, I think this is going to be important. Okay? All right. Now, when we copy formulas, and I just did this with AutoFill, there is some interesting magic that happens here when I copy a formula, whether you use standard copy and paste or you use AutoFill, there's some interesting magic that happens here. Just like text and numbers, as we've said, formulas can be copied, and I already did it. But the magic here is that Excel will adjust the formula so basically that it does the same thing just in a different location. So for instance, looking at my example here where I had C5 plus D5 plus E5 plus F5, when I auto-filled that down to the next cell, Excel just basically adjusted everything automatically for me. So I don't have to rewrite it. Excel's smart enough to go, okay, you need this formula. You need it to do basically the same thing just in this spot. So I'll fix all the references for you. So now it's C6, D6, E6, F6. And one more cell down, C7, D7, E7, F7. So whenever we take a formula and copy it to a new location, Excel is just going to automatically adjust everything for you. That's fantastic. We love that. Otherwise, we'd have a lot more work to do, right? And we all hate extra work. Nobody likes to do extra work. Okay? So, and I already talked about this, AutoFill can be used to quickly copy a formula to multiple cells, and it works in any direction. Which, by the way, that's a thing about AutoFill I didn't spend a bunch of time on. AutoFill works up, down, left, and right. Just drag in whatever direction you need to go, and AutoFill will work fine. Okay? Oops. Oh, crud. Let me get back into my presentation here. I hit the wrong thing. Where was I? Sorry about that, folks. And let's go into reading view from here. Nope, I got to skim all the way through it. Hold on. My mistake. Right? Edit that out in post, right? Numbers, autofill, entering formulas, order of operations, copying. Okay, so copying our formulas. Even here, let's say I wanted the totals along the bottom. Again, just to show you with autofill, if I want to do equals, this is C5 plus C6 plus C7, okay? I can drag that over, and voila, it works fantastic. Everything gets adjusted for me, okay? And we love that about Excel, okay? All right. Now, while that's fantastic, sometimes there's a problem, okay? Let's talk about the relative reference problem. Excel's ability to adjust cell references when you copy a formula, as we said, is amazing. It saves us time. We love it. And what we've been writing, or what I've written in our formulas so far, are something called relative references, because basically it's relative to the position. So that, if I copy the formula somewhere else, it relatively changes it. All right, well, that wasn't the right word, but it just uses the relational references. The problem is sometimes that's not what we want to have happen in a spreadsheet. So let's do an example. I'm going to open up a different file here. And let's look at this. Similar spreadsheet, but a little bit different going on. Let's look at this. I've got a bunch of salespeople, and again, there's some formulas here that are already, look, we've got the C6s, it's already been done here. I've got the totals. And now I need to figure out the amount of commission that each of these people made, okay? And basically, I'm going to take the amount that they made, multiply it by their commission rate, and come up with some sort of number. Now, using what I've learned so far, you would think it'd be something like this. Okay, I need to type the equal sign because I'm doing a formula. I'm going to take then G5 and multiply it by what we see up here. Okay, the commission rate is 4%, so that's cell H2. Okay, and there we go. That worked great. Kendra gets $937.68. So, okay, I need the same thing for Pamela and Julie, right? So let's do the tricks that we learned and let's do autofill. So you go to the cell, we go to cell H5 here and we drag down, and then something weird happens. First off, it says Pamela gets nothing and Julie gets some sort of weird error that says value. And you're like, what the heck's going on here? I thought I was supposed to be able to autofill things. Well, here's the problem. I used only relative references. And you're like, what? Well, let's take a look at what happened. Okay, the formula in H5 is correct. Notice it says G5 times H2. That's exactly what we wanted. The problem is, look at the next cell down. When I move down to H6, notice what happened to the formula. Well, everything adjusted. So now the formula is G6 times H3, and H3 happens to be an empty cell. You're like, no, I wanted it to stay here. But the problem is, how does Excel know that? You used a relative reference, and relative references are the default all the time. So Excel went, okay, I'm just going to move this. And even worse, down here, now we've got G7 times H4, so I'm literally trying to take some number and multiply it by the word com. And Excel is really confused now. It's like, I don't know what to do here. So the problem is, with this formula, I need part of it to adjust and part of it to not. And the part that we need to stay fixed is the H2, right? We need to keep referring back to cell H2, but I want the other ones to change. Well, how do I do that? Well, PowerPoint. That is where we have something called an absolute reference. And that is, sometimes we need Excel in a formula to stay locked onto a cell no matter where we copy the formula to. And these are called absolute references. Okay, remember the default that we've used to this point is called a relative reference, which means when we copy it, it's going to change relative to where we moved it. But sometimes I need Excel to not change part of a formula or not change a reference. And that's called an absolute reference. And we designate that with dollar signs. Okay? So what I really need to do here, let's erase this formula and start over. I'm going to say equals G5. Now that can stay relative because that part needs to keep changing, because for the next two rows that needs to say G6. I'm sorry, yeah, G6 and then G6 and then G7 times. Now this is the part that I need it to always stay the same. I need it to stay on H2 all the time. Now there's two ways to do this. I tend to be hardcore and I type it. So I said you need to type dollar signs. So I'm going to do $H, $2. You need both of those. Think of the dollar signs as anchors, because I'm going to talk about mixed references in a second. The $H says lock yourself to column H. The $2 says lock yourself to row 2. So you need an anchor for each. I need to anchor to column H, and I need to anchor to row 2, which in this case generates a cell. Now, I get the same number that I did before, but this time when I drag it down, now notice it does exactly what I needed it to do. Now I've got here G6 times H2, G7 times H2. Okay. Now, why not just write 4% into each formula? Because that's too much work. And what's also really cool about this is that now I could come up to cell H2 and say, you know what? Let's give them a 5% commission. Well, if I had written the 4% into every formula, I would have to rewrite all the formulas. But in this case, because I pulled that number out and I'm referring to it by way of a formula, I can put anything I want there. Hey, the commissions are 12% this time. I can just keep typing numbers here, and everything down there just keeps adjusting. This is part of the beauty of Excel. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go into any examples on the next part here, but remember I said you needed both dollar signs? That's because there's another type of reference called mixed. And in a mixed reference, it contains both part relative and part absolute. These aren't as common, but they can be useful in more common spreadsheets, complex spreadsheets, I should say. Basically, what it means is if I went $A4, the column is going to stay fixed, but the row number is going to change. And if I went $4, the A is going to change, but the 4 is going to stay fixed. So again, think of the dollar signs as anchors for a boat or anchors for references. And you need to anchor both parts. Okay? If you anchor a boat, if you only have one anchor, the boat can still move around. But with two anchors, it stays locked. Okay? Anybody who's ever used a boat knows that. All right? You need a front anchor and a back anchor to keep the boat in one spot. It's the same deal in Excel. If you need to stay locked to the same column and row, you need both anchors. But sometimes you only want one anchor. All right? Now, you noticed I did it the hardcore way, is that I actually typed all that stuff into these cells. I actually typed the dollar signs myself. There is, for you keyboard folks, a way to do that, and that is with F4. Notice this. I'm going to do the G5 times H2, and I didn't type the dollar signs. You can just press F4, and it will cycle through all of the variations from here's relative, absolute, mixed, mixed. Relative, absolute, mixed, mixed. So just by pressing F4 after I write a reference, will cycle through it will cycle through all of the variations. Okay? I don't tend to, as much as I love keyboard shortcuts, I tend to not do that because I already typed the dollar signs. It's just as much work. Okay? I'm going to skip over inserting and deleting columns and rows because I'm a little bit behind where I wanted to be. So you guys can look at this stuff later. You've got the slides for it. I want to jump right to entering functions. I want to spend our last about 25-ish minutes on working with the functions part. So we've covered a lot of the navigation basics. We've covered AutoFill. We've covered the order of operations. We talked about writing some basic formulas. Okay, with using plus signs. But most of y'all went, wait a minute, why did you write all those plus signs when you can just use the sum function? Yeah, everybody always says that in class, but there was a method to my madness because I needed to talk about formulas first. Now let's talk about actually using functions. Remember, functions and formulas are two different words that mean two different things. Functions are always part of a formula, but a formula doesn't necessarily have to have a function in it. Okay, now what is a function? Okay, functions in Excel are basically shortcuts for mathematical operations. Some functions, pardon the pun, are very simple. Okay, the sum function in Excel simply sums up or adds up the numbers. It's pretty straightforward. It just adds. Other functions can be extremely technical and complicated, like PMT or stdev. I mean, there's hundreds of things these in the product. And especially like in the financial ones and other stuff, there's a lot of stuff in there. I don't understand what it does, but it's not my business to. I don't need to at this point in time. Basically, a function in Excel is always some sort of single word. Okay. Now, they're always listed in all caps, but the reality is you don't have to type them that way. If I'm in a spreadsheet and I want to use the sum function, you can just type sum however you want to type it. You do not have to type it in all capitals. That does not matter. And as I mentioned, Excel literally does have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of built-in functions. I didn't bother to look up the number because it varies from version to version, but they're all in there. There's tons of these. Now, again, just to reiterate, functions are always used in some sort of formula. Okay, remember, the words are not interchangeable. All formulas like we said before, start with an equal sign, okay? A function, if you have it in a formula, is then generally the first thing in that formula, okay? And once you invoke a function, you always follow it with a left parenthesis. No space, just immediately type the left parenthesis. We're not going to go through this type of example today, but a formula may contain multiple or nested functions. Basically, what I want you to know here is that the order of operations still applies when it comes to nested functions. It's going to solve inside out. Now, here's an example of a formula that uses a function. This is kind of our standard syntax. So the first part, the equal sign, that invokes a formula. That tells Excel that this is some sort of formula. Then the next thing is that we pick our function. So that's the name of the function. Now, I typed it in all capitals so you could read it, but you can type however you want. After you type the name of a function, it is always, always, always followed by the left parenthesis. There is no space here. So left parenthesis, that's the third part. Inside the parentheses can be a bunch of what we call arguments. Some functions have a single argument. Some of them have multiple arguments. Okay, so that's why we do argument 1, comma, argument 2, comma, dot, dot, dot. That means there could be lots of these. When you look in the help, it will identify what the arguments are. Then lastly, to close out the function, you type the right parenthesis. Again, depending on the function that you're using, this may look different. Now, within a function, how do we refer to cells? Let's look at our sum function again. Actually, let me go back to, is it this spreadsheet? Yeah, because we're going to redo what we did here. Okay, but we're going to use functions. Now, when you want to refer to several cells that aren't next to each other, you have to use commas in a function. Now, I'm going to use sum as the example, but there are lots of cases where you may want to use different things. If you want to add up 3 or 4 cells and you want to use the sum function for that, you can separate each cell reference with a comma. To be perfectly honest, though, with as simple as summing and adding is, to me, it's just a lot easier to use the plus signs. Okay. Now, if I want to add up a bunch of cells that are in a contiguous range of some sort, you must designate that with a colon. Okay. We don't use a dash because a dash looks like a minus sign. So that's why we use a colon. And the syntax here is that you're going to express this as the top left to the bottom right, because basically you're always making a rectangle of some sort. So in the case of this sum function right here, it's A4. We've got A4 through C10. Again, we use the colon here. A4 is the top left. C10 is the bottom right. And all cells contained in the resulting rectangle will be summed up. Okay? So let's look at the sum function because that's really the common one. So let's say I want to sum up some numbers here. I'm going to come here to this to cell C8, and I want to use a function instead of a formula. Remember, formula, if I was just using a strict formula here, I would do C5 plus C6 plus C7, okay? Which, that works perfectly fine, but maybe you don't want to type all that. If I want to use a function, I would go equals sum. Now, the next thing I have to do is a left parenthesis, and now I need to identify from where to where. Now, don't do this. This is an amateur mistake, and I've seen this. Some people go, okay, C5 plus C6 plus C7. No, you're already invoking addition by using the word sum. Okay. Now, this could work, C6 comma C7. That works, but that's a lot of extra typing. What you really want to do is C5 colon C7, right parenthesis, and then press enter. And there you go. There's my sum function, C5 to C7. And now, kicking it back to AutoFill, I just drag this over, and ta-da, all done. Okay? So I used the sum function to do the addition. I could come up here and do the same thing. Equals sum, and I want C5 through F5. Worked great. Now I'm going to drag it down, and voila. And I'm going to ignore this error right now. Okay? Easy peasy. Okay, I only had to write 2 formulas, and then I used the AutoFill to drag the formulas out, and I'm all done. Okay. We're going to come back to summing here in a minute, but just to let you know, when it comes to functions, again, there are hundreds of these things in Excel, and you can find them on the Formulas tab here, and they've got it kind of all spelled out here in this function library section. Okay, they're classified by groups. You can click the drop downs here, and you may or may not know what these are. Again, there are tons of these things in here. There's even more functions hiding under these ones. My goodness, there is just an insane amount of stuff here. If you use the insert function button here, that is also basically the same sort of interface. And you can go by category here, which is basically the same of buttons. The nice thing about here is that when you come through here and look at these, it will give you a kind of a description of what each one of them is. Additionally, with all of this, there's help everywhere with functions. And if you're not quite sure what it does, you can always click on a function here and say help on this function, and you'll get all the help that you need. The reality is that for 95% of us, you use about 3 or 4 functions at the most, and then you're good. Okay, nothing wrong with that. I will probably be doing some classes specifically later on things like date and time functions and text functions further on down the road, but I'm not going to go into those tonight. Okay. Couple of helpful things, just so you know, if you make formula mistakes, syntax errors, Excel will prompt you and say, hey, I think you did this wrong. And it also does something called error checking, and that is if you're actually manually typing formulas and Excel thinks you made a mistake, or maybe a formula doesn't look like the others, it may suggest that you fix that. All right. You can look at these slides a little bit more later because I need to get on to auto summing here. Okay, so auto sum. All right, let's be realistic. The sum function really is one of the most used functions in Excel. And as a matter of fact, it's used so much that some people, when you say, okay, write me a formula, they start to just write the word sum without even thinking about it. And it's like, no, maybe you're not summing things up. Maybe I need you to multiply, okay? So think about what you're doing here. And that's why my next line here says auto sum, exclamation point equals is computerese for does not equal. There's a couple of ways to express that, but auto sum does not equal all formulas and functions. Basically what I'm trying to say there is that just because somebody tells you to write a formula doesn't mean that you're going to use auto sum or that you're even going to use sum in the first place. Okay, it's just a form of whatever that's going on here. But basically, because the sum function is used so much in Excel, Microsoft built a button for it, and it's called auto sum, so that you don't even have to write equals sum. You can just click a button and it's going to do it. Hooray! We love time savers. Okay. Now, there's a weird thing about what they added here, and I'll talk about that in a second. But let's see what this does. All right, so let me erase all this stuff that I did already. And let me come to right here in cell C8. Now, yes, I could type equals sum, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? That's a really common thing. Why bother with that? I can literally click on the cell, come up here to the auto sum button, which is just the Greek letter sigma, okay, for sum. Click on that. Now, it's going to show me here, this is what I think you want to do. If that's right, all I need to do is press enter, and I'm done. So literally, a click with the mouse and a key, and I'm done. I didn't have to write anything, I didn't have to type anything. Heck, I barely had to think. And I got a sum. All right, let's do it again. Now, I could use AutoFill here too, but let me do the same thing on cell, just to repeat, on cell D8. Auto sum. Hey, that looks right. That's great. Now, be careful about auto sum because sometimes it's not always smart. Let's look at this. For instance, I'm going to come here to these cells, all right, and I'm going to say auto sum. But look, it's guessing wrong. I happen to have a column here that says employee number, and it's trying to include that. And you're like, no, that's not right. Now, there's 2 ways to solve this. One way is to simply just correct it by highlighting the actual cells that you want. You're like, no, I don't want B5 through F5. I just want C5 through F5. So I can just drag with the mouse and press enter, and that fixes it. I'm going to show you another trick on how to fix that in a few minutes. Here's the other thing to be careful of when you auto sum. Let me do another one of these. Okay, that's still wrong. Now, watch what happens here. When I get to this cell, watch what happens when I click auto sum. Notice the first two that I did, it went left and right, which is exactly what I wanted. But now when I get to here and click auto sum, look what happens. When Excel has a choice of going up and down or left and right for auto sum, it's going to default to up down. And in this case, look here, this cell G7 has two cells above it that could possibly be added together. So, or we could go left, right. So if I click auto sum here, Excel is always going to default to going up, down, and that's the wrong direction. Now I could correct that with the mouse simply by saying, no, I want these cells. I'm going to show you a different trick though for all of this here in a few minutes. All right. So let's come back to our slides. Now, the weird thing about the auto sum button is it actually does do more than sum. I don't agree with Microsoft's choice here, but the auto sum button, if you look at the right side of it and click down, you can actually kind of do auto average, auto count, auto max, and auto min. The problem is they cram those all under the same button called auto sum, and to me that just, for new users, I think that just causes confusion about what the heck's actually going on here. But I could do an auto average, an auto count, an auto max, and an auto min if I click the right side of that button instead of clicking the left. Okay? Now, let's go back to that little problem I talked about before. Auto sum is pretty good at figuring out what you're trying to sum up, but sometimes it guesses wrong, or it guesses wrong about the direction, or maybe you want to, let's just call it do more with auto sum. So there's a way to kind of force this so that it doesn't make mistakes. Now again, sometimes it's pretty obvious. If I click here in cell C8 and I press auto sum, it's pretty darn obvious what I want. But again, we had that confusion here where in this case with auto sum, it was picking up an incorrect cell here at the beginning. And then once I got down to cell G7 here, it was completely going the wrong direction overall. So how can we keep auto sum from quote unquote misbehaving and doing exactly what I want it to do? And in that case, what you're going to do is you're going to highlight the cells that you want to add up, but you're going to add on one extra blank cell and then click auto sum. So here's what we're talking about. So for the across here, I already know there's a problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight C5 through F5, and I'm going to add on the empty cell here at the end. So I'm going to highlight those cells. Okay, so I've got the 4 cells I want to add plus one blank, quote unquote, at the end where I want the auto sum to appear. So now I'm going to come up here and click auto sum, and look at that. It worked perfectly. Now you can do this for multiple rows at the same time. So for instance, I can grab all of these cells, go across and say, okay, I want to add up across on each one of these. So I'm going to highlight the cells that I want plus the extra cell at the end where I want the sums to appear. So now I'm going to click auto sum, and look at that. It's just like magic. Boom, there they are. Because you've defined exactly what you want to add up. You've defined exactly where it needs to go. So Excel's like, okay, here you go. Now this also works up and down. Okay, I could highlight these cells plus this one and say auto sum. Works great. I can also do it on these 4 columns at the same time and say, okay, I want to sum up each one of these and put the totals down here at the bottom. Voila. That's actually faster than the AutoFill, right? Because remember earlier we were doing this. I was saying, okay, give me this cell, auto sum it. Okay, now let's click and drag that across. All right, that works, but that's more work. I can eliminate a lot of the work just by doing it this way and summing. And you know what? I'm going to take it a step further. Well, I was going to, so it's not a surprise. The reality here with this little trick is that it can work in both directions at the same time. So look at what I've got here. I've got totals that I need to go across, and totals that I need to go down. So I can do this. I'm going to highlight all the cells, plus empty cell at the end, and empty cell at the end. So an empty cell at the bottom, an empty cell on the right. Okay, now I'm going to click AutoSum and watch this magic. Look at that. Filled out the entire thing for me. So it did every sum up and down, it did every sum across, and then it did a sum of the sums and gave me the total basically for everything. That's cool. I literally just did 1, 2, 3. I did all those formulas and all that summing in what, 2 seconds, if that? If I was to write all that stuff out by hand, it might take me 5 minutes. But I could highlight a bunch of stuff, click one button, bam, done. It's faster than microwaving popcorn, which you don't want to burn. But you see here, the AutoSum works great. Okay? So a lot of ways that we can exploit that and make it do other fun tricks. Highlight the cells you want to add up with one extra blank cell, click AutoSum, and you're good to go. The last section here, just a quick overview of some of the other common functions you might run into. Again, we've picked on some quite a bit, but some other common ones you might use are averages, max and min, and counts. Okay, I think I have another spreadsheet here for this example where most stuff is done. Yep, there we go. And let's say I wanted an average of a bunch of numbers. Well, okay, equals average. There's the function. Left parenthesis. Always have to have a left parenthesis. Then the range that I want to average. In this case, it is C5 colon C9. Right parenthesis. Done. And then I can just autofill that across and get my averages. Okay. Max and min work the same way. Let me do min. And again, C5 to C9. That just gives me the smallest number in each one, in each area. Okay. Equals max, left parenthesis, C5 to C9. Drag that over. And there you go. Very quickly, I just did a bunch of computations, by writing it once and dragging it across. Okay. Now, back to PowerPoint. You can write these functions and have them actually show up in your spreadsheet. But there's one little fun little detail here also. You can also see quick results of all of these functions without actually writing them. It's a great way to verify. Often this is a great way to verify that you wrote your function correctly. Let me grab these cells right here. All right. I just highlighted these 5 cells. Look down on my status bar down here. When I highlight those 5 cells, Excel does a quick calculation and gives me some results without even having to write a formula. And it already tells me that the average of these 5 cells is 7979. It tells me that I've selected 5 cells. That's the count, or I should say how many cells have content. And it even has a sum down there of 39,895. Hey, that's pretty much right. I could also highlight all of this and get the same get information. So without even writing a function or a formula that contains a function, I can do some quick calculations. You can actually display up to 6 of these. If you right-click on your status bar, you'll see your options here right in this section, right kind of about 3/4 of the way down on this menu. You can display an average, a count, a numerical count, minimum, maximum, and sum. Average, count, and sum are on by default. You can turn on the other ones if you want simply by selecting them. So this is kind of like a quick calculation without even having to write a function or a formula. Or it's a great way to check. Like, did I write this average correctly? Well, if I highlight these cells and look down here, okay, yeah, that's right, 7979. Okay, I did that perfectly correctly. Yay. All right. Okay, highlight the cells. There's the ones, enable, right click. So there's the instructions. Okay, last 5 minutes. Well, thank you all for attending. Now, before you run away, let me paste the survey link. All right. Now, this survey, I'd really appreciate if you guys take a few minutes. Go to that site that is called Metrics That Matter and fill out those surveys. Don't worry, you can be anonymous. You will not be added to any email lists. but this goes towards my Microsoft certification. So I would really appreciate if you took a few minutes after this class to fill out that survey. Hopefully also you can still see the OneDrive link. You know what, let me paste it again just in case some of you came in. Maybe Raylene can't see it. So the second link I just pasted there is to my OneDrive, and that's where you can download all of the sample files for tonight. After the training tonight, I will then upload this to YouTube, and I will paste that link in the Facebook invite. And you can watch this training later, as well as everybody who missed it, which everybody did miss this tonight. There was like 15 some people that said they were coming, and I don't know what happened. I guess everyone forgot there was something more important, or I don't know, whatever. They had other things to do. But hey, I am very glad the three of you are here. Hey, you know what? Send me your suggestions for future sessions. I love doing this. Looks like we're getting some good responses from people. I just need to find nights that don't have a lot of conflicts and get people interested. Invite your friends. You're welcome to share the links to these trainings with your friends. Anybody have any questions? I haven't seen a lot of chat. I've not seen a lot of stuff in the chat window tonight, so either I was answering all your questions or you're just absorbing, but if you got any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the chat window, and I'll be more than happy to spend a few minutes and answer those questions for you. Otherwise, go back to the one where you did the auto sums. In what respect, Jason, that total was not right? What do you mean that total was not right? Which one where I did the auto sums? Right here? What total's not right? It was 40K-ish. Oh, yeah, there's a total down here. That's not an auto sum. That's something from a previous example. I didn't write this. They were just, if you look at the formula, they're just adding up G5 and G6. This file was used for some other training stuff, and I just didn't bother to erase it. So yeah, good eye. I was just ignoring that. Yeah, the real total here is 71,000. This was just some sort of other total that was there. Yeah, good catch on that. I should have removed that from the spreadsheet to not be confusing. Any other questions for any of you? All right, well, if there's no further questions, again, thank you all so much for attending tonight. I hope it was worth the hour or hour and a half that you were here. Would love to hear more suggestions for classes that you want me to do online. Tell your friends, tell your family. I'm also available for private tutoring and other training engagements. If you're interested or know somebody who is interested in that sort of thing, please send them my way. Otherwise, again, please take a few minutes to fill out that survey. I'd appreciate it. Otherwise, thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your evening.